Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Shanita Smith and I'm the Director of Membership and Public Relations here at NatSat. Today we're presenting on integrating security into your school, presented by Ariel Siegelman, President of Draco Group. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the question box in your WebEx control panel. I'll be bringing them up during the presentation, and we'll also have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Now, without further ado, we will turn over the time to Ariel. Our presenter is a GA post-certified guest lecturer instructor with extensive operational management experience in domestic and international security projects. Ariel, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So we're about to embark on our second webinar in this series. So for all you guys who were at the first one, welcome back. And for all you guys who are here for your first one, welcome. As many of you probably know, my background is from the Israeli security establishment. I was in a special forces unit in the military there. And so a lot of what you're going to see throughout this series is going to be from the Israeli flavor. Feel free to please ask any questions during the webinar, like Shanita said. It's very helpful, I think, for everybody. Any question that you guys have as an individual, probably there are a number of people in the group who are listening who have similar questions. So today we're going to be talking about building your security plan. And if you read the kind of the little blurb that we put together on this webinar, you probably saw we talked a little bit about integrating security into your environment and into your lifestyle. So I was going to call it integrating security into your life, but I really think that a plan is so important for being able to integrate security that we really need to focus on that aspect of the program. So if you got a good plan, then security is naturally integrated into your life. If you don't have a good plan, it's always going to just be a hindrance in your life and it typically won't be so helpful. Okay, so today what we're going to learn is, well, and of course my thing isn't working now. One second, please. Okay, in this webinar, you're going to learn to utilize sound security concepts to build a basic security plan. So I want to highlight the word basic here. A lot of times it's a negative word in the security world especially, but I think in any professional situation, if we think about basic, we usually think like, oh, well, that's not really for me. I want something advanced. So I can't help but go down to the basic principles of security, and I think that when we can identify the basic principles, then we can create an advanced program. But what we're really going to be focusing on in order to create that advanced program is, again, those basic principles. So let's talk about what is a security plan. So in order to understand what a security plan is, it's first important to ask what is not a security plan. So most security plans that we see are not plans at all. They are a piecemeal of equipment and a cut and paste of Google searches. So it might sound funny to you, but I'm sure you guys have also experienced this where there's a lot of questions of like, okay, well, what do we do? I don't know. Gosh, we got this problem. We got to do something. I don't know. Let's hire an off-duty cop. Okay, yeah, great. Oh, and let's get some cameras. Okay, great. But those things are not put together with any sort of a plan in place. And so it's just sort of like this piecemeal thing that happens. And then a lot of times the institution doesn't really get what it is that they're looking for because they haven't really identified what they're looking for. So not having a result in mind. Is there a question? I'm hearing a lot of echo. So, okay, so not having a result in mind that you're trying to achieve, not having a goal in mind, will often leave us without reaching any goal. I think it makes sense. Taglines from Homeland Security or from the FBI are not a security plan. Cut and paste from Google is not a security plan. Checklists from the Secret Service or the Department of Education are also not a security plan. All of those things are good references. They're all good things to understand and try to utilize, but a plan is more than that. Okay, so remember this as well. The definition of regulatory compliance. Regulatory compliance is a term that gets thrown around a lot in the security world. I know that in schools and in hospitals, any kind of institution has regulations that you need to uphold. Now, in security, if you are looking at, well, how do we maintain regulations? Keep this definition in mind. Regulatory compliance from a security perspective is a euphemism in professional forums for the lowest level garbage that still allows you to keep your doors open. So I say that somewhat in jest, but we are not here to talk about just the bare minimum. What we're going to want to focus on through this entire series is how do we do this really well, not how do we do the bare minimum to make sure that we don't collapse. I think that makes sense. It does to me. I hope it does to you. So with that said, what is a security plan? So a security plan is about integrating equipment and protocols into your community and your lifestyle, which allow you to maintain control of your environment and regain control if control is lost. So you'll notice here that we have italicized the word community. So let's talk about that for a minute. So there's a distinction between me implementing equipment and protocols into my community versus my lifestyle. So the community is the physical environment. In my physical environment, I've set things up in a way that I'm able to maintain control of that environment and utilize the principles of security to make sure that I keep control. Lifestyle is how you live in your environment. So, for example, I may come to your campus and I may say, oh, you know, it'd be really great if we could lock all the doors except this one main door. Well, in your lifestyle, you have to know that, like, well, listen, we're not able to do that because we need that door open and this door open and that door open. And that's fine. So the protocol needs to have your lifestyle considered very deeply and your culture considered very deeply in order for the security to work. I'm going to give you an example of this that I've seen many times. We go to an institution. This seems to happen over and over again for schools. So we go to an institution, they have a gate, and the gate is wide open. We ask them, well, what time do you open the gate? What time do you close the gate? And they're like, oh, well, we leave the gate open all the time. So I already know what happened. They got a gate. The first day they had it, they closed the gate. People came the parents came to drop their kids off in carpool, and the gate was closed, and the carpool line lined up for, 2 miles down the road. It was really irritating to everybody, including the neighbors, and that was the last time they ever closed the gate. So that's an example of protocols not really working with the lifestyle of the institution. I know that you guys have an institution that you probably don't have, not many of you have a carpool, but that's okay. I think you understand the concept behind what I'm talking about. Okay, so we have to maintain control of the environment. Moving on to that next italic. Let's see if here we go. You see my little pointer. So we maintain control of the environment, right? We want to be sure to focus on routine life. Routine life allows us to make sure that no problem happens. So we can prevent an emergency situation. Now, if an emergency does happen, you can see the next thing here that we've identified is regain control if control is lost. So we have to know how to prevent an emergency from happening, both through our structure within the community as well as our protocols within our lifestyle. And we have to know how to regain control if we lost control because, if there's an emergency, we have to have the right protocols in place and the right equipment in place and the right training in place to know what to do. So let us move along. Okay, this plan must be comprehensive. So what does comprehensive mean? It means that every piece of the plan has to have a reason, and it has to be based on sound security principles. We need to be thinking about the big picture, not just, oh, a laptop got stolen. Let's put a camera right here facing the spot where the laptop got stolen. So I mention that because I see that kind of stuff all the time. A lot of times a school especially will have some sort of an incident. That's what causes them to think about security in the first place. And then they think specifically within this tiny little box of, oh, it was this incident. So we only have to take care of this incident. A laptop was stolen. We're going to set up a camera that points just at the spot where that laptop was stolen. So that's not a comprehensive plan. It's not really a plan of anything. So every piece of the plan has a reason. I talk about cameras a lot because they're a very big item that people immediately go to when they think about security, right? We think about security cameras. So I'm going to ask you a real quick question. I may have actually even said this in the last webinar, but I'm going to say it again. Is there such thing as a security camera? The answer obviously is no. There's no such thing as a security camera, as much as a security camera company will tell you they've got security cameras. So a camera is a device that collects a visual image, and if that device is utilized in real time where you can see something happening before it happens, then it is being utilized as a security tool. However, cameras typically are used for investigations. Investigations are not security. Security is about stopping something before it happens, or stopping the next person from getting hurt or the next item from getting stolen. Okay, so cameras. We see these cameras be put into institutions. If I come to your institution and I ask you, what is the purpose of that camera right there? And if you can't tell me, that means that you have a useless piece of equipment that is not part of your plan, right? So every camera should have a reason. Every lock should have a reason. Everything that you do within your comprehensive system has a reason for it. Very important. Do not do things just because everybody else does them. How many times do I hear, oh, but the FBI said this is what I should be doing. This is what schools should be doing. Okay, so if the FBI came and they said this is what you should be doing, that's different than you reading online that like, oh, well, the FBI recommends that everyone does this. So just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Sometimes everybody is doing something because it works. And many times people are doing things because they don't know what else to do. So they just kind of do that because everybody else is doing it. I'm sure you've seen that in many cases in many other areas. In security, it happens a lot. So we said the system, the plan, must provide a results-based program. We have to identify a couple of things. Number one, what does success mean to us within our plan? So, okay, what is success? Define that. Sit down with your team today or tomorrow or whenever you have time and start talking about, yeah, what does success mean? What do I want to gain from this plan? What are the results that we want to see in our institution from a security perspective? And how does each component that we're thinking of within this plan lead to the results? So in other words, if I'm thinking about putting cameras up in my institution, I need to always be asking myself in the back of my mind, okay, well, what result is that camera there going to provide me? And how about that camera there? The system should be principle-based. It should not be rule-based. The difference between principle-based and rule-based is very important. It's very significant. And here's an example. So very often we will tell our kids and we will tell our teachers, let's use a fire drill as an example. So fire drill. You're going to go out that way. That's your exit. See the map on the wall. It's got a little red arrow. That's where you're going to go. That's it. Okay, so that's a rule-based system. Now, what happens if the fire is over there? Well, so hopefully all of us are smart enough, and our teachers and our students are smart enough, that we do something different. We go against the rule. But a principle-based system would say something like this. Fire is hot. Fire also creates smoke, which makes it so that we can't breathe. So if there's a fire, it's more dangerous here than it is out there. So you want to get out there as fast as possible. So the closest exit is right there. So if there's a fire here, you need to go out as fast as possible, and that's the closest exit. But the principle is get out as fast as possible. So if that exit is blocked, or if it's locked or whatever else, then go out the other way. Go out the fastest way. That's the principle. We just received a guide that is being written for religious institutions across the United States. We were asked to help give them ideas for how to make this guide better. So one of my biggest critiques on the guide is that it is replete with rules of, first do this, then do this, then do this. If your system is built on these rules, here's another example. The leader of the emergency response team, the leader is the headmaster. And the second command is Jennifer. And the third in command is, so we name all these people. Well, that's also a rule-based system. How about we identify what the job is that needs to be done during an emergency, right? So we have to have someone calling the shots. We have to have someone communicating. We have to have maybe multiple teams working, and something we can get into another time. But if the headmaster is out of town or homesick, so that's okay, because the principle-based system says we need someone in charge of this emergency. So you could have 10 people on the list of possible candidates for that principle that needs to be covered. Any questions up until now? Okay.
We're good.
Okay, great. Now, we said it before, I'm going to say it again. We said it before in another webinar, so you may remember this. Guys, this is not about checking boxes, okay? Checking boxes is kind of within that same genre of the rule-based system. It fits within that like regulatory compliance thing. I think that having lists are important as something to go back to and remind us of the principles that we need to be thinking about. However, if we're just thinking about life in terms of checking boxes, then we will never acquire an elite level of an advanced security concept. So in my life, I tell this to my kids, we are not just trying to get by, we're not just trying to check boxes, we're trying to discover what's the best possible way to do anything that, if it's worth doing, then it's worth doing right, as my cowboy stepdad always used to say. So what is one very important principle? Perhaps you guys remember this. Control. Security comes back to, if I had to say it in one word, it comes back to control. So how do we control our environment and regain control if we've lost control? Because make no mistake about it, guys. If there's an emergency, the definition we've said before of an emergency is a loss of control where there are dire consequences. That's it. That's an emergency. And so all of security is about this world dealing with and looking at and trying to control an emergency situation. Stop it from happening before it happens, regain control after it happens. There are many times that people have told us they do not like to talk about response, right? So response has to do with this concept of regaining control if an emergency happens. In the security world, it's much more comfortable to talk about how do we prevent every emergency from happening. Well, maybe if we're living in a Disney movie, we could pretend that we could control all of life and no emergency would ever happen and no kid would ever skin his knee. But that's not true. It's not accurate. It's not possible. So my answer, if anybody has has discomfort in speaking about response. So think of it like this. Response is related to control, obviously. Response is, it is prevention, okay? Response is prevention because response prevents the next person from getting hurt. Response prevents the next piece of destruction. Response means that you are regaining control so that you're minimizing damage. And that's the name of the game in security, minimizing damage. So two main areas of control. We mentioned it very briefly a few minutes ago. I have to maintain control, which means I have to have a plan that revolves around routine life. How do people come into my campus? How do people leave my campus? Where do the kids go from here to here? You know, how do I deal with routine life, and what are the pieces of equipment that help me deal with that, and what are the training of the people that help me deal with that? Regain control speaks about emergencies. So again, shift my consciousness when I'm dealing with developing this plan. Okay, what do I do if there's a fire? What do I do if there's a violent person? So to go through these scenarios and have a plan and to think carefully about what equipment do I have to protect me and my community from these things, and what training do we have, and let's think about routine, and let's think about emergency. Okay, so how do we build this comprehensive security plan? Now we've talked a lot about the definitions of what we're getting at, so how do we do it? Well, we do it through security concepts. Again, we don't just piecemeal, we don't just do something because that's what other people are doing. We try to identify what are the concepts that are the foundation for my philosophy, and through a philosophy, I build a plan. Number one, analyze each of the pillars of security. Guys, I am right now giving you the recipe that we use. I'm giving you the recipe. This is what we use when we're building a security plan. We analyze each of the pillars of security. Don't worry, we're going to go through each one of these and define exactly what it is and how we do it. Okay? So analyze each of the pillars of security within the rings of security, according to the principles of security, and in relation to emergency chronology. So that's probably pretty convoluted, so let's break it down. Okay, analyze each of the pillars of security. What are the pillars of security? These are the pillars of security. So you can see these pillars are, So these pillars, here we go. These pillars are all built on a foundation of design and a long-range strategic plan. So the pillars are sitting on top of your plan, but they are holding up your whole security apparatus. Now, you can see the pillars are equipment technology, they are protocols for how to use the equipment technology, and they are training. So you can see that training is the biggest one, because training is typically, the interesting thing about training, right? It's typically the number one thing that is left out in most communities and in most institutions. And yet it is the number one most important thing. What your people know how to do. You know this already innately, right? The reason that any of your institutions are as successful as they are is not because of the kind of laptops you use. It's not because of like the canoes that you paddle in. It's not the equipment. The equipment is helpful for having the experiences and generating the education that you're generating. But what is the most critical component is your team. It is your people. People are your absolute greatest asset in anything you do in life. So by training your people how to deal with security and to know how to do these protocols and how to use the equipment, you're going to have a far greater security program than by purchasing more cameras or purchasing, I mean, shoot, you can go, you know, in today's world, you can spend $1 billion on security gadgets and NASA grade, you know, laser beams and all kinds of stuff. And frankly, that's not as effective as having good people who know what to do. So I'm going to tell you a story to highlight that, by the way. Probably you remember a few years ago there was an attack in Mumbai, in India, right? So there was an attack. There were these terrorist cells came in on the river. They attacked a number of hotels. I think it was 5 hotels, very fancy hotels where a lot of tourists stayed. So I was one of the Indian government brought in a bunch of Israeli consultants after that in order to try to improve their security capabilities. So I was one of the Israelis brought in for a different program. I was farther in the eastern side of the country, but I had access to a lot of information during this time, and I found it very fascinating that in one of the big hotels that was attacked and horrible things happened there, the response capability, okay, so they had, think about this, they had literally millions of dollars they had spent on very fancy cameras, and they were all over the hotel, cameras showing cameras. The response capability consisted of one, I'll say it again, one guy with, I can't even say security officer, right? One guy with an Enfield rifle from World War I that he had never shot. In fact, they don't even know if the rifle worked. And so what they got from their security program that was not based on a real plan, what they got after this attack was 9 hours of high-definition security camera footage of horrible things happening, okay? Because they did not focus their attention on the right things within these pillars of security. They did not focus their attention on training. They didn't understand how important training was, and they put all their eggs in the basket of equipment, technology. Technology is cool. Technology ain't the thing that saves the day. Okay, any questions up until now?
No, we're good.
All right. Okay, we said within the rings of security. All right, so we're looking at the pillars of security, but we're specifically looking at the pillars of security within the rings of security. So some of you may know what rings of security the concept means. I'm going to tell it to you anyways. The concept is this: you have a target. You have this thing that you're trying to protect. Okay. Here's my little thing I'm trying to protect. Now, what I do is I create controls within my environment around this target that I'm trying to protect. In your case, I think that we can all agree it's the kids and secondarily human life, right? But the kids are primary, and then you and your staff and faculty are secondary, but also super important, way more important than the laptops and whatever else. So let's say you got the kids as the primary target, and then you have these concentric rings of controls that you have implemented around that target so that any kind of threat that is coming from the outside has to pass through these different rings, and you have more of an opportunity to stop them. You have more of an opportunity to understand their intent. You have more of an opportunity to distance yourself from that threat, so that so those rings again are like these different layers of security within your system. That's the concept. So for your institution, there are only three rings that you need to think about. Here are our kids and us and the people that are the target, okay? Now, the first ring is what we call the proximal zone. So again, I'm telling you right now, we are giving you the recipe. When I go into your institution, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look inside the room right here, and I'm going to say, in fact, do it yourself right now. Look around you and say, okay, well, what equipment and technology, what protocols, and what kind of training could I implement right here in the proximal zone, this space that is proximal to me, that could improve the security for something happening, right? So what does it mean to improve the security? It means routine life, it'll maintain control, and then think in terms of emergencies. Well, if there was an emergency, what would I do? If there was an active shooter, what in this room already exists? What already exists that is equipment and technology, training, and protocols right now, right here? And then ask yourself, what more could I do? What more could we do here to improve it? Then going out to what we call the inner zone. So there's an inner zone. Now, we have to be creative in your environments. You know, some of you have buildings, some of you have fewer buildings, and you spend a lot more time outside. That's okay, though. You still have the same principle, right? We're not talking about rules here. We're talking about principles. So you can still utilize the same principle and say, well, my proximal zone is my campsite. The inner zone is if I was in a building, so the inner zone would be the other rooms that I'm not in right now, or the hallways, or something out there. If I think about in terms of the inner zone, right? So if there were screaming right now, God forbid, in that other hallway down there, so that alone would be an asset to me from a security perspective for an emergency. It would give me information and time to make a decision. It would give me information that there's a problem, and then I'd be able to start collecting more information and decide what to do. So the inner zone has a lot of value. Again, I can ask those same questions. What can I implement in the inner zone of my institution that will assist in a security realm, both for routine life and for emergency life? And then moving on to the outer zone is the general campus, right? So like if I was in a traditional school, I'd probably have a field or, a football stadium or a big parking lot, I don't know, but all those things are in my outer zone that allow me to pay attention and look outward and to see a threat that's coming. So an example of this is we were at a very large corporate headquarters, and they had a security officer watching, again, a very fancy surveillance system, and he's just kind of flipping through the cameras, but they didn't have their cameras isolated within these zones in terms of, an asset for the proximal zone, an asset for the inner zone, an asset for the outer zone. So it was curious to me because when we asked him, like, all right, well, you're looking at the parking lot, right? I mean, that would be an avenue of approach here coming straight to the front door. So what would is this the camera that you look at often? He's like, well, yeah, I mean, I flip through cameras. So even the concept of when you're looking at your camera or what you're focusing on for what time period in your day has to do with, again, integrating that concept of comprehensive security, understanding that my lifestyle, oh, well, there's more movement over here at the end of the day and more movement over here at the beginning of the day. So sometimes your security assets and the consciousness needs to shift so that you're paying attention to the right things. Because what's the thing that we want to protect? It's the crowd. In this corporate environment, the guy was saying, yeah, I'm just flipping through cameras, looking at pictures. That's not a sound security model. A sound security model implements these concepts. And you'll be looking at the right camera at the right time because you'll understand the concepts if you're going to have cameras. Okay, now we said according to the principles of security. So let's recap. We're talking about the pillars of security. We're talking about analyzing those pillars of security within the rings of security. And now we have to do that according to the principles of security. And the principles of security we touched on last time. We're going to talk about it again. We said control is the overarching principle. But how do I get control? How do I maintain control? How do I achieve this concept? Is I have to understand the intent of people around me. I want to have, again, equipment and technology, protocols, and human training to be giving me extra information into the intent of people around me. I want to know that I gain distance from a threat. If I can gain distance from a threat, if I can keep threat at a distance from me, then I've gained time. And if I've gained time, I can respond. Response comes in two ways. If you remember from last time, response comes in defensive as well as offensive. We said defensive means you're running away from the threat or you are keeping the threat from getting to the kids. A fire is a great example of a threat. You're running away from the threat. An offensive response means that you have someone or a team that is going toward the threat in order to allow everyone else to get away from the threat. So they are stopping the threat, they are gaining time, they are allowing other people to gain distance. In a violent situation, that would be typically an armed team. Usually in most of the institutions in America at this point, that kind of a response comes from the law enforcement community. So we'll talk more about that when we get to violent events, but let's stay on topic here for creating a plan. Now, notice that deterrence is not one of our 5 principles of security. So deterrence is something that you'll hear a lot of. You may be asking this question of yourself right now. Well, why not deterrence? Why wouldn't that be a principle? My answer to that is deterrence. It's kind of like somebody said to me not too long ago. They're like, "Oh yeah, security industry. Oh yeah, smoke and mirrors. Ha ha ha, smoke and mirrors." And I'm like, actually no, it's not smoke and mirrors. So you want to set your program up not to be smoke and mirrors. You want to set your program up so that if I'm up to no good, I have a really hard time doing something bad to you. It's not about me getting the like daydream that you're so strong and I look at your muscles and so I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so scared right now, I'll go attack someone else. That would be deterrence, right? Like I'm afraid of you and I've been given this imaginary image, and the imaginary image may be true, but it may not be true. In a lot of cases, it's not. And so I'm not chasing after deterrence. What I am chasing after is true security principles. And if I have implemented a true security system based on true security principles, I will naturally acquire deterrence. But deterrence isn't the end-all thing, because also, guys, someone who's really messed up and really up to no good and really going to try to hurt you, they may not be deterred by anything, right? I mean, you could have your property surrounded by Abrams tanks, and like certain crazy people out there don't care. So forget about deterrence. You can have that as a footnote, but that's not the overarching goal here. The overarching goal is to have real security, not smoke and mirrors. Okay. The last part of our concept of our security goals here is to build a plan in relation to emergency chronology. We've already touched on it, but emergency chronology is before an emergency happens, right? During an emergency, after an emergency. It's super simple. We said security is about dealing with emergencies. That's how I acquire this overarching goal of control. And in order to do that, I have to be prepared to deal with an emergency before it happens and try to stop it before it happens, right? So we have prevention. During an emergency, we have response. And after emergency, we have recovery. So if my plan is missing any one of these 3 elements, if I'm ready to prevent something and I'm ready to respond to something, but I've forgotten that I'll have to recover from this emergency after the smoke settles, so to speak, then I'm missing something, right? Like, now what do I do? How do I patch people up? How do I get them to the hospital? That's an important part of your plan as well. Okay, let's do a test case. We can do the same test case in the room that you're sitting in. So I want you to ask yourself 5 questions. Again, this is the recipe, guys. 5 questions that I'm going to ask myself if I'm in your building or in your site. I'm going to say, okay, well, in which ring am I currently located? Well, okay, I'm in the proximal zone. What am I focusing on? Maybe I'm focusing on this point as part of the inner zone. No problem. I just have to identify what ring am I located in right now. What items from each pillar of security exist in this ring already? Number 3, what can I add from each of the pillars to make this ring stronger? Remember, the pillars are equipment and technology, protocols, training. So what can I add from each of those pillars to make this ring a stronger ring of security? Number 4, what principle is each new idea covering? So here's an example of that, of why that question is important. If I say, okay, let's put up a fence. You know what? We need to put up a fence. Razor wire, spikes, and, you know, let's have a big fence like a prison. Fantastic, great idea. Okay, well, what principle is that covering? So, and how does that fit with my lifestyle? Is it the right answer? Is it covering a principle? Well, I could probably argue that it's covering a principle, but maybe I can cover that principle differently. So, you know, it's funny because we ask people to draw a picture of a fence. I joke, obviously. I'm not telling you guys that you should have a fence with razor wire and spikes, and I don't think that that's necessary in any way, shape, or form. But let's ask yourself this question since we're talking about the principles of security. So what principle does a fence provide me? Well, a fence delineates a physical barrier where I see that this is my property on this side and that's not, right? So there's a physical delineation. A fence also may be the most valuable thing. So think about it like this, right? Can I climb a fence? I promise you I can climb a fence. I can cut through your fence. I can dig under your fence. No problem. I can drive through your fence, right? So a fence is not something that keeps people out. But here's probably the most valuable thing that a fence does provide you, is that it gives you advance notice of someone's intent. Because if I'm climbing your fence, or if I'm driving through your fence, or if I'm cutting through your fence, you know that I'm up to no good. There's no question in your mind. There's no way that I'm going to climb your fence and walk through your property, and then I'm going to tell you, like, oh, yeah, I didn't know this was your property. I thought I was just taking a walk in the park. So the fence offers you knowledge of the intent of the individual. That is number one value that a fence offers. Now, if you know that you're dealing with intent. Also slightly distance, slightly time, no problem. So now I know that that's the principle that I'm dealing with. I can start to ask myself, well, how do I acquire that principle through different means? Maybe I could plant rose bushes, and I've acquired the same principle. Maybe I can plant holly bushes, you know, like it doesn't have to be. Maybe I can put nice boulders, and if I see somebody climbing up over the boulders, that tells me that they're up to no good, right? So the value of asking these questions is that it allows you to think in a principle base, not in a rule base. You don't have to have a fence. You can acquire the result that a fence provides you if you can identify what the result is beforehand, and then you can get it through different means. Any questions about that up until now?
No, but I do have one question.
Sure.
I've heard the cameras could be essential and that having a fence is beneficial, but what equipment, since you said equipment is not, you know, gonna substitute for having an actual human being, what equipment would you say is essential for all, if not almost all, programs to have?
So if we go back to the principles and we say, all right, well, we need to be able to provide, you know, intent, knowledge of intent of individuals coming in. So that means that we need to be able to know who is coming in, right? So immediately I have to know that, oh, well, people can't just come and go as they please. If I have, it's kind of like my home, right? So I want my home to be very open. I want all you guys to feel welcome to come here, and I will serve you dinner. But here's the thing. Please don't be upset, but you are not invited to come to my house and to just walk in whenever you feel like it. Okay? You got to knock first. In fact, it would be nice if you could even tell me before you come. So I've got a door. I've got a lock on my door. I've got a good lock on my door. I also happen to have cameras in my house that allow me to see who might be coming, who is not invited. So I'm reluctant to say, well, these are the kinds of equipment that you should have. I'm much more comfortable saying these are the principles that you need to be able to acquire in your institution. Every institution needs to know who's coming, and they need to have it set up in a way that if you don't want that person to come in, it's not by their goodwill that they don't get to come onto your campus. It's because they can't come onto your campus unless you allow them to come on. It's not because of your goodwill that you can't come into my house if you want to and I don't want you to. It's because I have my house set up in a way, and probably your house too, right? You probably lock your door, and most of you, I don't know, but you want to know also that you can communicate, right? So communication systems are very important, and that is one thing that I will say has been severely lacking on a lot of campuses. So, you know, you may have some radios, but you know you got dead zones. You may have cell phone that, you know, you don't have coverage in half of your campus, or maybe not at all in your campus. We've been to some of your campuses where, you know, you don't have cell phone coverage at all. So to come up with some sort of a solution for communications, I think would be very important in all of your institutions. If you don't have that already, you need to really get on top of that. I think it's obvious, but I mean, if there's an emergency and you can't let half of the people know, then all you're doing is extending the emergency for longer, and that falls into the category of time, just on the negative side, right? And then you're also expanding the emergency in terms of how many more people could get hurt, because they don't know there's an emergency sometimes. So again, I don't want to talk about the rule of get this kind of radio, get this kind of PA system. That's not what's important, because a PA system is going to be relevant in one institution. It's going to be totally irrelevant in another institution. Same as radios, right? Like, radios are irrelevant in one institution. They're super relevant in another. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, so the fifth question. How does my idea relate to the chronology of an emergency situation? So again, if we're talking about radios, right, we're talking about communications equipment. I need to be thinking in terms of like, all right, well, how do I communicate with people while it's routine life? There's no emergency. God willing, there will never be an emergency. So great, this is how my radio is going to be utilized in that scenario, and that's hopefully the vast majority of time that we exist in our institution. However, how does this piece of equipment relate to an emergency? How am I going to use it in an emergency, and how am I going to use it after the emergency? So ask yourself these 5 questions, and they will take you very far. Now, security zones. Here's another very important principle that we utilize. It's been very valuable for us in creating security programs. So this is a methodology that is implemented to guide the location of equipment and technology, and to concentrate your security efforts in order to maximize the benefit to your community. So what does that mean? We were on a campus that had approximately 500 acres not too long ago. They had some very large buildings. They had 22 large buildings. They had another approximately 40 houses, essentially. They had been told by multiple officials that your area is too big. You cannot possibly secure this area. So I chuckled at that because, you know, I think that's silly. I can't even go into it, how silly that is. There's no such thing as a problem that you can't at least make it a little bit better, right? I mean, I think you would all agree with that. So So security zones is what we use to make their problem better. Let's look at what security zones are. So first of all, I set up zones like this. I've got a sterile zone. The sterile zone essentially means that I have identified where, remember we said, I identified the target. What is the thing I'm trying to protect? So I'm trying to protect the students. I'm trying to protect the staff and faculty. Great. Okay, now, where is the area on campus? You probably know this innately, that there's certain areas on campus that, like, during daytime hours, this is where most people are. And during nighttime hours, they may be somewhere else, or maybe they're in the same place. But I want a sterile zone where the vast majority of my population resides, should be sterilized in terms of no one who I don't know their intent is allowed to go into that area. I have to screen them to know that this person is okay before they go into that zone. So that zone is sterilized. And if I find that someone snuck into that zone who I did not check yet, I didn't filter them, so I know immediately, and I can get them out of the sterile zone and check them or tell them to leave. So outside of the sterile zone, I've got the semi-sterile zone, right? I'm not trying to protect the trees on my campus. I'm not trying to protect the rocks on my campus, okay? So again, I'm not saying anything against the natural world. I think that we should protect trees and rocks, but what I'm talking about is from a security perspective, obviously. So again, my security program is not about making sure that the pine tree doesn't get shot. My security program is about making sure that the kids don't get shot. So I have a sterile zone. The semi-sterile zone is outside of that sterile zone. That it's kind of like the concept of the inner zone versus the outer zone in our rings of security. So in this semi-sterile zone, it allows me to look outward, and I know that I'm not sterilizing the parking lot, so to speak. It's not sterile. People can drive in there. They can park. But from where I am in the sterile zone, or maybe on the edge of the sterile zone, on that seam, I can see the semi-sterile zone, and I already advance forward to take care of a potential problem before it reaches the sterile zone. Not trying to protect 500 acres. I'm only trying to protect a small spot where most of the people are. Now, everywhere else outside of that, it becomes a filtration zone. So I'm filtering what I'm seeing out there beyond my property, or maybe beyond my field, or out, I'm keeping my eyes up. That's the filtration zone. And then there are filter points that, as the person said before, right, if somebody's coming from the semi-sterile zone into the sterile zone, then I have a filtration point that I've set things up that they have to come through this area. It's not that I'm asking them and I have signs that say, like, please come to the front office to check in. We said it before, guys. Do not let your security be dependent on the goodwill of other people. Most people have goodwill, thank God. But your security program is not looking for the people who have good intentions. Your security program is looking for the people who have bad intentions. And this is how we set it up in a way that physically people with bad intentions cannot decide to do bad things to you without having a very rough time. And then beyond my property, I have to also, going back to our list here, the unsterile zone, I have to be able to identify and accept that there are certain areas that are not sterilized, that are not semi-sterilized, that are outside of even the filtration point. So, I get off my property in the woods, way back over there, that's unsterile. If something happens over there, I'm not in control. I need to know that so that I can do what needs to be done to gain control in that environment, which is going to probably be different than in the sterile zone. The sterile zone, I've got a lot more assets identified and put toward security than I would put toward in the unsterile zone. Here's an example of a campus where you can see how we've set up these zones. So the red here is the sterile zone. We identified this is where all the students are on this particular campus during the entire day. So there is no point in this in this red line here that would be easily permeable by someone up to no good. And within this red zone is a lot of security assets that allow me to, if somebody from within the zone caused problems, I can immediately jump and do something to stop it, minimize damage as fast as possible. You see here, the yellow is all the semi-sterile zone. They happen to have a security team here, so they're able to do patrols. They're able to really kind of close down this area. It's not sterilized, but it is semi-sterilized. Here are filtration points. So the filter points where, people can, there's a little entrance here. So they can screen anybody coming into the campus at these points, and the campus is set up in a way that if you want to come in over here, it will be very, very hard for you to do so, and the community is given a lot of time to see me crossing this area if I'm trying to come in anywhere else other than the filtration points. Now, here's a question for you, and I'm going to answer it for you too, obviously. Should these zones stay static? And the answer is no. This is a conceptual process. It's a conceptual program. So I need to know that if there's something different on my campus or in the area guys, by the way, you can set up this same kind of concept if you were taking a trip and you're staying in a hotel, right? You can identify real fast. Okay, well, this area is going to be our sterile zone. We're setting it up right now. We're going to have hall monitors and ushers and teachers are going to be out here. This is our sterile zone. We're focusing our attention here, and that down there is the semi-sterile zone, and that over there is the right. So this is a concept that can be utilized anywhere you go, also for your own family. On this campus, the plan is that if they have a football game, so you can see they've got a football stadium here, they know that 99% of the population of the community is in this area right here. Okay, so now the sterile zone is here. They have it set up with equipment and technology, protocols, and humans to make sure that this zone stays sterile. This is the semi-sterile zone, which is the parking lot. So they've got somebody or a number of people roving here, monitoring what's going on before they arrive to the filtration point, where they have a final filtration before they go in to the sterile zone. They also have an ability here with people monitoring the crowd, where if something happens that somehow somebody got in and caused problems or something happened that was bad, so they have people who are able to quickly re-sterilize the zone if the sterilization was harmed. And then the rest of the campus, you notice, is simply a locked down zone. They just lock the doors. They don't have to put their attention over there. If something does happen, if somebody steals a laptop over there, they know that their definition of success is not dedicated to a laptop. Their definition of success is the people are okay. The people are safe. Okay, now we got to figure out who stole the laptop. No big deal. We'll look at the cameras. We'll tell what happened. And our overarching concept that I keep on saying is, do not leave your security up to the goodwill of others. So that is what we've got for you today for a plan. These are the principles. This is the recipe of how to build a plan. If you guys have questions about how to do that or specifics for your own campus, specifics for your own situation, feel free to contact me. Feel free to contact us. And this is my contact information. Guys, I'm giving you a tool here that I mean it when I say it. I will answer your questions. I'm happy to, I can't do 100 hours of work for nothing, but I will absolutely answer questions that you've got that are specific to your situation. I'm happy to help, and I think this is a very important thing that we're doing here. Ultimately, it comes down to human life, and in my opinion, there is no greater value on planet Earth than human life. So be well.
Does anyone have any questions at this time for Ariel? You can either put them in the chat box or you can hit the little hand button at the bottom of your panel, and I can unmute you so you may ask your questions. But at this time, we are open for Q&A.
We got anything coming in?
I don't have anything coming in.
Okay.
Yeah, if you guys have no questions, thank you, Ariel. As always, you are a great presenter for us, and we always enjoy your presentation. So thank you once again. Everyone else, stay tuned. Ariel will be doing an entire series on security, and you can check out our list of topics on our website, natsat.org, and then we'll be posting the remainder of the dates and times for the remainder of the webinars on our website as well. Stay tuned, everyone. Thank you again, Ariel. Everyone have a great day.
Absolutely.
Yay.
Take care.